Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is the alternative election broadcast from UnHerd. If in your house or wherever you are, you're having an argument about whether to be watching Sky or ITV or the BBC, well, put that all to one side and stay with us, because for the next hour and a half at least, we'll carry on for as long as we have energy. We are going to be interpreting and discussing what we're seeing before us happening at the end of this historic general election campaign. In about 21 minutes, the exit poll will be announced on the broadcasters. This is the almost always quite accurate prediction of what exactly is going to happen, and then the results will be coming in overnight. What we've got for you tonight is kind of an unusual setup for us. We are not in the studio, as you can see. We are down in the UnHerd Club, and next door you might be able to hear in the background a bit of hubbub. That is a party. Yes, there is a slight rearranging the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic atmosphere going on here at the UnHerd Club. We are kind of careening towards some sort of, whether it's a disaster or a happier conclusion, we're not quite sure yet, but there's an iceberg straight ahead. And so we have opened the champagne, and we've got a room full of journalists, writers, thinkers, absolutely no MPs, of course, because they're all about to be either sacked or find that they've still got their jobs somewhere around the country, so they're all at their counts. But that is what the noise is, and actually quite soon we're going to go with Flo on a little tour of the party, so you can come with us and see what we are experiencing here at the UnHerd Club tonight. But first of all, we have an incredible roster of our own stars and many other people joining today, and two of them we are going to take you after this to, I can see there's a Mary Harrington and an Aris Rusinos just gathering. We have Michael Crick here. We have Kathleen Stock. We have all of our all-star cast. But first, it is the almighty duo that make the These Times podcast, Tom McTague and Helen Thompson. Welcome, guys.
Welcome, Freddie.
So, Tom, let me start with you. I mean, you have been writing these incredible dispatches for us over the past 6 weeks. You've traveled the length and breadth of the country. What's going on? What do you think? If you had to try and sum up the mood, and you've covered many of these election campaigns, what is the feeling right now?
Strange lack of energy, I've found. You know, it doesn't feel like the election has penetrated everywhere into people's houses. You know, there's some people who sort of said, I haven't had anyone knock on the door. I've had no leaflets through. I don't know who to vote for. I want somebody to persuade me, somebody was telling me. And this is this feeling, you know, from Scotland, from Uist in the northwest of Scotland in the Hebrides, all the way down to Tunbridge Wells, where I was a few weeks ago. And it just feels that there's so many people who are undecided. A lot of them have said they want rid of the government, either the Conservative government in Westminster or the SNP in Scotland. But beyond that, they're not quite sure. So in Scotland, you have people who are very pro-independence, but who don't want to vote for the SNP. So they don't know where to go. And in England, you have a lot of people who are not happy with the Conservative Party, but are not convinced by Labour, and are not sure where to go beyond that as well.
Do you think it is unusually? I agree that the atmosphere has been very negative. This is definitely an anti-election rather than a pro-election. You don't find people who are very excited about any of them, really, and I would include the likely victors, the Labour Party, in that. Is it just us being nostalgic and saying, this is new, this cynicism, negativity, actually, or do you think it's always like that, really?
No, I do think there is something new, and I think perhaps it's because of the economic situation that we have had since 2008. There's just a kind of reasonable cynicism. Actually, living standards have not improved for a long time. We've had a series of crises, probably an unprecedented series of crises over the last 14 years. And so people, I think, are quite weary. And then what they're presented with is a Labour Party that has been smart and defensive in its...
But it's kind of said nothing, really.
It's like a transfer of power, somebody put it to me. That's what it feels like. You know, we're going to go from the Conservative Party, they're transferring power to another group of people who might be more sensible or level-headed or less infighty. I think that's one thing that is just done for the Conservative Party. But beyond that, it requires a bit of a leap of faith, because we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what they've said. We know what they're not going to do. They're not going to raise certain taxes. They're not going to go back into the European Union. They're not going to bring back free movement of people.
So is it fair to say if they are about to win, And we don't know yet, but it looks like they will. Are they? Is this a win by default?
I think it's a little bit more than that, because it has required them to do a lot to get to this point where they can win by default. They have. Keir Starmer has been pretty ruthless in a way that Rishi Sunak has not. He has. Keir Starmer has expelled the former leader of the Labour Party. He's not allowed to stand. He's expelled other candidates. He's moved the party into a position where it feels uncomfortable, particularly over, say, Brexit, where he's saying not only that we're not.
He's moved it to the right.
He's moved it to the right. Now, what seems to be going on, what the Conservative Party is saying, look, he's winking at the electorate. He's saying, yes, I've moved to the centre, but you know me, I'm kind of to the left. I will do more once I'm in. Trust me. But then for a lot of people, it's like, well, what does that? Do I want that kind of Labour Party? So it's very hard to know with in some senses, they're not even answering the questions, which I think Tony Blair was criticised for that as well in 1997. For not giving all of the answers, but I think there was more there.
You say it's hard to know, and it is. We were searching for a picture of Keir Starmer earlier for an article tomorrow. To find one where there's an expression on his face is actually very difficult. His face is, and then you look at Boris Johnson pictures, and they're all kind of comedic, ghoul faces. Keir Starmer's face doesn't move very much. Helen Thompson, let me just first share this rumour with you, because it's election day, and it wouldn't be election day if it wasn't full of most likely untrue rumours. I mean, it's now almost like a tradition. They circulate on Twitter, in WhatsApp groups, and suddenly there is a group of journalists in the party next door putting it about that Rishi Sunak has dramatically outperformed expectations, and that certain publications, not ours, are preparing alternative front pages for tomorrow's edition with headlines like Rishi's Miracle. Chances of that being true?
I would have thought not very high. I think it's difficult to underestimate, or it's difficult to get into focus just the sheer scale of the Tory catastrophe. Whatever the actual outcome tonight, and I do think there are a serious range of different possibilities there. If you go back to like 2021 or late spring of 2021, this was a government that won a by-election in Hartlepool with more than 50% of the vote. A seat the Conservatives didn't even win
3 years ago.
Yeah, under Margaret Thatcher at any point in that time. Keir Starmer was seen then as someone who'd done a terrible job of leading the Labour Party for the 18 months he'd been in charge at that point. And he was already embarked upon his let's slay the left. But he wasn't getting it anywhere. There were lots of actual noises about his leadership at that point. And yet, subsequently, the turning point would seem to be the end of Boris Johnson and the shift to Liz Truss. But clearly, Boris Johnson's last 9 months in office were highly problematic. It's collapsed. And that's why I think it's very difficult to give Labour really too much credit at all in this story.
So do you see it as basically a kind of self-immolation?
I do, yeah.
Harry-kiri by the Conservative Party?
I do. I think if you go back to 2019, is that they in December of 2019 they had the best election result since the 1980s in circumstances that were really hard because the demographics of the Conservative losing young voters, not actually being able to do anything about it by the policies that they pursued, and yet still they pulled an astonishing victory, both in terms of the size of the majority, albeit not a landslide, and the percentage of the vote they got in December 2000.
Yeah, and it feels like a complete ancient history.
It seems like a lifetime ago. It's quite hard to remember. And one thing that was true about that election was it felt like existential for voters. Is we were all forced to make choices, sometimes very hard choices. So for people who hated Brexit, they had to decide whether they hated Brexit more than they hated Jeremy Corbyn being Prime Minister. And sometimes the other way around as well. And that meant that everyone had to be engaged, even if they didn't want to be engaged, even if it was a winter election. It was quite oppressive. It had been a year of just like psychic pressure, if you like, on everybody from living in this country, the political turmoil. But at the end, we, the voters, had to take responsibility for deciding what was going to happen.
That was, and I don't think it's a partisan thing to say, it had an excitement to it.
Yeah.
Not necessarily of supporting Boris Johnson or the project, but it was surprising. There was a sense there was a new type of politics. There was a new coalition. I remember this night 5 years ago, or roughly, and yeah, when that exit poll came out at 10 o'clock, there were gasps, there were tears, there was a little fight in the event I was at. It was a real massive moment.
But
and
I think
now
it's as well it was
didn't lead to
because we all as individuals had to take some responsibility because the choices were so stark. Clearly, Britain could not carry on in the political impasse in which we'd spent that year, and it had to resolve one way or another. And we each had to choose. And I think that what's different this time is because there isn't really any choice, because even people who don't want to vote for the Labour Party understand that the Conservative Party can't stay in office. And so all that the Labour Party has to do to win is simply to exist.
I'm going to let you go back to the party for a few minutes, and then we're going to get you back. I have a Aris Rusinos over there, and someone, is that Mary Harrington? We have Mary Harrington in the room, ladies and gentlemen. So while we change your microphones, Flo Reed, yes, our very own Flo Reed, co-presenter of this channel, has a microphone and a light, and she's going to do her best to take you into the party here and give you a sense of what's going on, and she might even talk to some people. Let's see how this goes.
Okay, everybody, I don't know if I'm live yet. It's incredibly loud in here. I feel like one of those reporters in the middle of a thunderstorm. I'm at the UnHerd party with a lot of journalists who do not like being asked what their predictions are for the election, so I'm going to ask a few. We've got our own Archin Iona from UnHerd. What are your predictions, guys, for the coming evening ahead? 10 minutes till the exit poll.
I think it's going to be a big win for Labour, but I don't think it's going to be as big as a lot of people think.
Okay, so there might actually be a bit of a disappointment for Labour.
Not a disappointment, but not as good as they want it to be.
Okay, thank you, Archie. Let me get in here, see who we can find. Jacob Brady, Deputy Editor of the magazine. Tell me, what is your prediction for this evening? It's only 10 minutes to go till the exit poll is released. What do you think is going to happen? Is it a Tory apocalypse as we thought it was going to be?
I think it's going to be very upsetting either way.
Upsetting for everyone. Unanimously depressing. That's the mood we're in, even though it does seem quite jovial up here in the party. Let me see if I can get in here. Yeah. Alex O'Connor, you're on the live stream. It's happening. Give me some.
I hear it's some kind of election or something.
It is happening. Whether we like it or not, it is happening. I'm going to get your opinion now. What do you think? Is your prediction Tory apocalypse or actually a surprisingly good night for the Conservatives?
I think, well, Labour are going to win this election, but I have this completely unjustifiable, uneducated hunch that they're not going to perform quite as well as everybody's expecting.
I've actually heard that from a couple of people in the room already, so maybe there is overconfidence on the Labour side.
Maybe that's just a bit of wishful thinking.
Maybe. We can stay optimistic in some way or another. Let me have a look around the room, see who I can see. That's some interesting. Let me go and get a couple of people in here. Excuse me, lads. Sorry, you're on the live stream now, so you're on television. Tell me, what are your predictions for the next 10 minutes exit poll? Is it the Tory apocalypse that we think is going to happen?
I think the Tories are going to win. I think it's going to be a comeback. The polls are wrong.
Lazarus-like resurrection.
I think it's going to be a shock result. Everybody's got it wrong.
Okay, go on, give us your Tory apocalypse or Tory Lazarus resurrection.
I think it'll be what everybody is saying it's going to be, which is a disaster.
A disaster for everyone involved?
Yeah, disaster for everyone. I claim no special knowledge. I believe the polls.
A pollster believer there, a very rare one in this crowd. Let's go back and see Marianne Aris in the room.
Okay, we had a little bit of technical trouble there. I think Flo got quite excited and was having a good time at the party, and we had to sort of drag her back, but we weren't ready. But here we are. I have Mary Harrington, Aris Rusinos, and Michael Crick. Michael has not yet been microphoned, I don't think. So
I'll speak very loudly.
So you can.
So maybe somebody else's microphone can pick me up.
That's a good plan. I'm looking at another broadcast here, and in exactly 7 minutes, we are going to find out whether what has been talked about is actually going to happen. And I've got to get a prediction before that happens. Mary Harrington, is there something you want to happen? And is there something you think will happen?
I'm aware of certain people, possibly a certain number of young people, who are gunning for 0 seats for the Tories. I don't think it's going to be 0 seats for the Tories. Even though I have it on, a little bird tells me that there is in fact a 0 seats rave happening somewhere in London tonight.
What, a rival party to ours?
I know. Who would have?
So what is the 0 seats?
0 seats.
What is that?
The 0 seats. Those a great many. Well, when I was a teenager, young people would chant "Smash the Tories," but they were doing that from a left-wing perspective. These days, young people, some things don't change. Young people still want to smash the Tories, but now they want to smash them from the right.
So you think there is now a generation of pretty right-wing young people for whom the Conservative Party is not right-wing enough?
They are not right-wing enough. Now, to be clear, if you look at the polls, the general impression one gets is that these are not the majority of young people. They're more male, considerably more male than they are female. And something like 50% of young people will vote for the Labour Party, of those able to vote. But of the remainder, a non-trivial subset, and actually a far greater subset than, for example, in my generation, would be or are supporting reform.
I'm gonna leave that interesting idea and jump straight to Michael, if I could. You have covered many of these.
Indeed.
It's not your first rodeo. And how has this one been different? And the mood, we've got 4 minutes and 46 seconds left. What's different about this campaign and the way it's concluded, do you think?
Believe it or not, I've been involved in every general election since February 1974, either as an activist or as a journalist. And this is the most exciting. And that's absurd, really, because we know the outcome, but it's all the other variables that we don't know, and that's what makes it interesting. What's going to happen to reform? What's going to happen to the Conservative Party? Are the Greens going to get any seats? How big is the Labour majority going to be? And furthermore, the campaign itself has been full of incidents. We've had some really boring elections in the past, 2001, 2005, so boring I can't even remember them. But this is not boring. We've had a lot of incidents. And I think it's going to be a fascinating night, and it's going to be fascinating to see all the people coming in, some of whom will not be expecting to be elected tonight, probably.
Yeah. Aris, I'm just double-checking my numbers here, so I'd make sure I don't get them right. But as elected in 2019, 5 years ago, 365 Conservatives, 202 Labour. So it was an 80-seat majority. The predictions of a company called Focal Data, the expert from whom is going to come and join us now, so we'll be able to see if his poll was at all right, says Labour on 444. So if we want to compare what's about to happen on our TV screens with what the village is expecting, the herd are predicting, anything less than circa 444, anything more than 100 seats for the Tories, even though that is wildly down and is a catastrophic loss, might almost seem like good news.
I'd like to hope not.
You're gunning for 0 seats?
I'm not young, unfortunately, but I share with Mary my desire for the total destruction of the Conservative Party. I'd also like to see Labour under extreme pressure at this election in very specific seats that I suppose we could call the kind of British equivalent of the Islamic-Gauchist vote. I actually think that's a positive development. I think, in my accelerationist way, I'd like to accentuate or accelerate the contradictions of British politics. I think that'd be a way to do it.
Yeah, you see how many channels are going to be giving you this 2 minutes before the results, the accelerationist. So I say the results, and if you are paying close attention, obviously the actual results we're not going to get in 2 minutes' time. What we're going to get is an exit poll, And as a kind of reformed pollster myself, I can tell you it's a weird thing that they do. They go to hundreds of different polling stations around the country and ask people how they voted and take these very detailed surveys. And then someone sitting in the centre does the maths about different baskets of seats that are similar and how the various swings might happen. And actually, it's pretty good. I mean, most recent elections, the exit poll has been pretty close to the eventual result. Michael, you'll probably have an example of where that didn't happen.
Well, I mean, 1992, I think predicted a much bigger. I can't remember. Actually, which way did it go wrong? I don't know, but it certainly did go wrong in 1992. And there's been others that have, where it's been a fair way off, but nonetheless, overall, it goes in the right direction. The very first one was 1970, where the BBC just went to one constituency, Gravesham, and they were so worried that their exit poll might not mean anything, they gave it hardly any coverage on the programme. And it turned out to be spot on, not just about Gravesham, but about the whole country. And it forecast basically that Ted Heath was going to win the election, which nobody expected that night, and they ignored the evidence.
So what is Michael, what's your prediction for what we're about to see in 1 minute's
time? A majority of 180. So that's
how many Tory MPs? That for me
how many Tory MPs? Oh, about 130, I suppose.
Aris, let's have a number. This is live time.
Oh, no, I'm not a quant.
130. Now, that would surprise on the upside compared to the average of expectations. Mary?
For the Conservatives, I don't think it's going to be as low as two figures, but I think it'll be low threes.
What we're about to hear in 30 seconds is the exit poll. And the weird thing is, what you're likely to see is a very large predicted number of Labour seats. But what you need to remember is, if it's more than 100 Tory seats predicted, it is more than most people have been expecting. And if it's closer to 150, that is good news, amazingly enough, for the Tories. Some predictions have been as low as 50, so watch out for that Tory number. What's it going to be? Let's tune in and let's react.
Wow.
131
Close to your prediction,
Tory seats.
Yeah.
So
410 Labour seats.
That's a majority of 170 for Labour.
61 Liberal Democrats. That's a very big number for the Liberal Democrats. 13 seats for Reform. I mean, if there is a headline from this exit poll, it is that Reform, this insurgent party that Nigel Farage he technically owns it. He became leader of it just a week into this campaign. Universally, almost, it's been predicted they will only take one seat, which is the one he is standing in. And if this exit poll is right, Reform will walk away with 13 seats.
Some of the MRP polls had them as high as 18, I think. So it's been a huge range. And but everybody was thinking in the last few days it'll only be 2 or 3, which of course would have caused a huge problem if Reform had got a massive number of votes and only ended up with 2 or 3 seats. It would have been even greater injustice than UKIP had in 2015.
So the sort of Nigel Farage version of Stop the Steal, this sense that it's been taken from him, is going to be much harder. If indeed this comes true, we're going to have to sort of slightly tiresomely be repeating that throughout the night.
Nobody really knows where these 13 seats are. I mean, we get up, if you talk about it, you can get up to about 6, and then after that you really struggle as to where they are.
And then it is significant, very significant, that yes, this, if it happens, is an incredible historic drubbing for the Conservatives. Let's not sugarcoat that. However, there have been a lot of predictions as low as 50, 60, 70 seats for the Tories. This is a surprise to the upside for the Tories. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Aris?
I mean, it's disappointing to me. I had hoped that Reform had one function in this election for me, which is to act as a captive bolt gun for the Conservative Party, just putting them out of their misery and clearing the path for a new right-wing development in British politics.
Well,
I would say that if that's what you're after, they may have pretty much succeeded.
I'll tell you the other thing that's interesting on here. The other thing that is interesting on the right, I mean, maybe I'm not reading it properly. 10 seats for the SNP.
Yeah,
that is a huge fall in the SNP for them. I mean, I don't think people have been predicting they would go that low, which means that Labour will have done resoundingly well in Scotland, which rather suggests they've done significantly less well in England than people
and that's
were
where
saying.
those 130 Tory seats are.
Yeah.
Because despite the overall national picture, obviously there are lots of Tory MPs who are kind of still have people who like them in their constituency. I'm going to bring on James Canazagorian. Who we need to put a microphone on him. He is one of these pollsters who has been giving us these prognostications, and we're going to hold you to whether you got this one right. So if we can put a mic on James, that would be great. React, Mary, to this. I mean, do you?
What will be interesting? I mean, it'll be interesting to see how close the exit poll is to reality tomorrow morning when we'll surface blearily. But it will also be. I think where the rubber hits the road is in which Tories remain, which seats have gone, which specific MPs have gone, and in what happens. To Aris's point and to Aris's desired outcome. I mean, I think you're probably going to get what you want, but it's just going to take a bit longer than you expect. And what I see happening from here is potentially, what's most likely is we'll see a rump of Tory wets amongst those 30-ish. Chances are the One Nation Tories will form the majority amongst that group.
Yes.
Because I think it's a fairly safe bet that they will have ensured that the safe seats were occupied by that particular subset.
And that's a very significant thought for people to take away, I think, which is that the sort of red wall Tories, the new type of Tories that came on board in 2019,
the new Tories are toast.
They've most likely,
there's going to be a huge divide between the 130, which I agree with you. I think they will be predominantly, not entirely, predominantly One Nation, or just middle of the road, really, and the party membership, who, after what's happened, are probably going to be more right-wing than ever.
And I think
a lot of them will have actually voted for reform. A lot of Tory members, I think, will have voted for reform.
And I think what we're going to see
next
in
the last 3 weeks
is we're going to see those rump One Nation Tories doing their best to argue that actually what we needed was, I don't know, lower taxes and more immigration, or some variant of that.
Well,
a move to the centre-right, and actually it was all the fault of Brexit, or there'll be some unspecified lurch to the right, which is supposed to happen.
Well, it's
a
party that has divided in two.
It is.
Michael, thank you so much.
Thank
Aris, as well, we're going to let you go for a moment, then we're going to come and get you after you've had a couple of drinks, see if you can say anything scandalous. And let's bring James Canazagorian on. Yeah, exactly. Careful what you wish for. And Tom, are you still about? Can we still get a bit of... Thanks, guys. James, come and sit here. So, I'm just talking to the camera over here. So the fellow who's just joined us is called James Canazagorian. He is the chief data officer. He is in charge of the polling for an insurgent new company called Focal Data. They've made waves in this election, and you have put out an MRP. This is what does it even stand for again?
Multi-level regression and post-stratification.
Yeah, this is real hyper geek stuff. How close was your prediction, first of all, to what we've just seen on our screens?
I think on the Conservative seat count, 20 seats off. So I think we were forecasting 108 seats overall. And I think on the Labour count, 30 seats over. So we got some distance out. I think on the Lib Dems, we said 57, got 61 there.
Yeah.
Reform only 2. But again,
well, I've printed them out, James, to make sure I can hold you to account here.
I think that's right?
So what you got wrong is that there were fewer if this is right, obviously, I know it feels quite kind of mainstream media to keep on saying we don't know what the result is yet. But generally, the exit poll is pretty good. Right. So what you seem to have got wrong, and in fact, most pollsters, just not to be unfair on you, seem to have got wrong, is you overestimated how much the Tories were going to be decimated. They've done slightly better than you had predicted, and Labour have done slightly worse. It is an extraordinary thing to say.
Let me speak for both Focal
extraordinary
Data
thing to say, but yes.
So our line was the Conservatives could win anything from 60 seats to 160. I think Focal Data was the second most accurate forecaster of all the MRPs.
60 to 160 is a wide
well, yes, because I think the
range.
Conservative vote share, which is probably going to be around 22 to 25%, was on what's called the bottom of the S-curve. So the relationship between votes and seats is basically an S-curve. So there comes an inflection point at which the number of seats you get dramatically rises.
But actually, I know that I'm sure that's the technical reason. I guess what our viewers are probably interested in is why have Labour done extraordinarily well, and yet ever so slightly less well than was generally predicted by your industry?
And I think, look, More in Common also forecast 126 Conservative seats, I think it was, and 430 Labour. So again, that Labour seat count is actually lower than I think anyone suggested. But this time, everyone said massive confidence bands. This time in this election, the industry were like, no, this is not a foregone conclusion. They gave a 100 seat range, basically, for the Conservatives, and it's landed in that seat range.
And yet, and Tom, what is actually significant about this, apart from like arguments among pollsters about S-curves, is that what some people were hoping for, others were fearing, was that the Tories were going to be truly left with very, very few MPs. There was even talk that Liberal Democrats might overtake them as the official opposition. That has not happened. The Tories are still by far the second largest party. The leader of the opposition will be the Tory party, and they remain as the presumptive opposition to this, what now must be a Labour government.
Yeah, I think that's a really important moment, actually, from this election, because if they had lost, if they had been overtaken, we haven't been in that position since, I think, before the Second World War. You know, and
the Tories were less than the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, if the Liberal Democrats had taken over the Conservative Party, then you're into a completely new world where you don't know what's going to happen from that point. You know, once the Liberals were overtaken by the Labour Party, they never came back. And this is the best Liberal Democrat result, I think, from since the sort of Clegg Mania days before they were wiped out. So this is a significant result. But I think reform, I mean, this is a big moment as well. This is Nigel Farage into the House of Commons, and not just by himself.
Yes.
You know, before one of the recent elections, I can't remember which one, it was Mark Reckless and Douglas Carswell. They'd both been elected as Conservative MPs before they went to UKIP. 13 MPs, so they're bigger than the SNP here. This is a moment from which they can build.
I think also, if you look at those numbers, right, a couple of things come up. First of all, I think the aggregate right-wing seat count will be, vote share will be above 40%. I think it will be significantly higher. So I think there's been an underestimation not only of the Conservatives, but actually if you put them together with Reform.
I haven't got the vote share in front of me.
No, but I'm doing the kind of calculations in my head, and you won't get that for a couple of hours. The second thing is I don't think anyone had Reform above
So just explain that, because that's very significant. So because the weirdness of our system is that you can get 400 plus seats with only getting 40% of the vote, and that is quite possibly what's just happened with Labour. It's possible.
I think Labour have got below or around 40%. And if it's on a lower turnout, I think there could be a scenario here where Keir Starmer has won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn in 2017.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see.
And that is.
We have to wait for the votes to come in. But I think that, look, we should
I'm just going to get you to repeat that. It is possible here that Keir Starmer has won fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2017.
I think if you look at that number, that feels, and again, we don't know the imputation yet, but that feels at around 40%.
Yeah.
And if the turnout is down in any way, and turnout was really high in 2017, it was 72%, I think that could be fewer votes. If, say, we're at turnout 65%.
They may have even got lesser vote share.
Could even have, it could be below 40. The other thing is, I think, look, if we're talking about the polls, the companies that got the Conservative count the most wrong, which is a Clutch, actually got some of the Reform picture correct. So, Excavation, for example, were...
Although, I've got to say, yours was not among them. I mean, not to criticise you especially, but you had 2 Reform seats.
But I think this morning I tweeted the major import of Labour's 5% decline during the campaign is not the Labour count versus Conservative, but to dramatically increase the number of three-way marginals between Labour, Conservative and Reform. This, plus the Reform vote share, and Scotland is where the potential exit poll surprises.
That is called an ass-covering tweet.
No, I think... Well,
any
look,
true professional needs to issue one on the morning of an election. I like it. But
SNP are on 10 seats.
Let's just before I kind of we move on to our next panelist, let's just draw together the big threads here. So you have a Labour overall majority, which in itself is obviously the headline story.
It's a massive majority. Let's not...
the temptation is to go to the second and third stories because we've been thinking about this for so long that it's almost a done deal. The fact is, Keir Starmer, that unlikely charismatic leader, has just apparently delivered a historic Labour majority. They've been out of government for 14 years. They're now going to be back in government with masses of room to spare. So that is obviously the main story.
It's still an astonishing result.
But because of the strange game of expectations that happens in politics, for the last 6 weeks, everyone has got so overexcited about the idea of a full Tory annihilation that it would be reduced to 50 seats, 60 seats, that paradoxically, this result kind of seems like, the Tories are still there. So that has got to be the second story, that they are kind of still in the game. And then obviously the most surprising, the most tantalizing thing is that Reform has actually won 13 seats according to this. It could be 18, 19, 20 by the time the actual results come in.
Is that as significant as... It's as significant, I think, as the SNP result. No, the Reforms...
Yes.
The seat count for the SNP at 10 seats. This is a party that held 56 out of 59 seats.
And the other thing that's going to go on here, and that was on a strange result as well, wasn't it? That they got fewer votes than UKIP, I think, that year when they won that extraordinary victory. But also, you've now got a situation where the left is split between the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, and the Conservatives are split between Reform. The left is a giant block there of 470 seats. But the vote shares might be wildly, different between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, so right-wingers should not be cracking open the champagne at this.
No.
The fact is Parliament is overwhelmingly left-wing.
Overwhelming.
Like, there's not 30 seats worse than 1997.
We are going to bring in Professor Kathleen Stock and Professor Eric Kaufman. Guys, thank you so much for your analysis, as ever. Please go back, get yourself a drink, have a good time. We're going to give you another little tour of the party, I promise. Should we? Let's get our next guest on first. So, Flo, we'll spare you the party tour for another 10 minutes or so. Kathleen Stock, Eric Kaufman, welcome to you both.
Hello. Great to be here.
So, I've just been talking kind of psephology or political punditry with our last panel. Some of this almost surprises on the upside for the Tories. It's not quite as devastating as some people thought it might be, whilst it's still obviously devastating. What is your reaction? What did you think when you saw that on the screen?
I was surprised. Obviously, I was gratified. I'm glad Labour won. I was surprised the Lib Dems didn't do better, and wondered whether it was because their campaign was so dreadful.
I want to talk about the Lib Dems. I mean, the Lib Dems did pretty well. I mean, 61 is pretty amazing.
But they weren't talking about being
the
opposition, and that's obviously not happened. And then Reform have obviously done spectacularly well relative to what they.
And how do you feel about that?
I don't have strong feelings either way. Really.
Okay. That's what we like on this show.
That's what you.
We're not in the business of TV punditry where you have to synthesize an opinion.
I mean,
I
want to see.
That's absolutely fine.
We don't know for sure yet, so I feel like we've still got to see how it all pans out. Who the characters are involved? But is Farage one of them?
Let's just dig into those first two things that you said. Then, Labour. A lot of people watching this who are familiar with your critiques of the Labour Party, particularly on the feminist questions, will be a bit surprised that you're celebrating their victory.
I'm not celebrating. That was
you said you're glad that they have won. Why are you glad?
Positive feeling. Well, because I'm afraid it's entirely a sort of reaction to the devastation the Tories have left. I mean, I just feel like they've run their course. They need to go away, regroup, sort out their entire infrastructure, work out what the Tories are about. And now they have a period to do that. Labour look more competent, and it's a very low bar, but they do look more competent. They don't look, to me, like they're going to immediately instigate all sorts of crazy gender stuff. It seems to me that they're rowing back significantly, and they're really quite socially conservative. It's quite a socially conservative manifesto, which suits me fine. So
you're because this, there are many people who look to you
I wish they wouldn't.
For a steer on what to make of this, and I just think that's very significant. You sounds like you are pretty convinced that the Labour Party has actually changed their tune on gender issues.
Oh, they've definitely changed their tune, but they did that a couple of years ago. I mean, they basically rode back from all sorts of wild commitments that they're clearly not going to make. And now in their manifesto, they're going to implement the caste review. They're committed to that. There's a lot of stuff in the manifesto about women, getting the rape conviction rates up, clearing the backlog, free school breakfasts, making the minimum wage a living wage, which will affect women because women tend to have lower paid jobs. So there's a lot of stuff that's basically going back to the stuff that I want Labour to do, which is to build a bigger state that looks after women's interests.
We've got a pretty big state already, don't we?
Well, I'm sure there could be shavings here and additions here.
Literally 3 or 4 days ago, Keir Starmer was asked whether a trans woman without a gender recognition certificate could use women's bathrooms, and he flubbed it. He didn't really answer it. And that was
I lose track of Keir Starmer's evolving position on this, but I thought he said, the last time I heard, not that I give any credence to it either way, but the last time I heard, I think he said that it was, they were for biological women only. I think Bridget Phillipson's wavering. I mean, basically, they don't understand the issues. They still don't really understand the issues. And they're obviously, I think, also trying to save some face and not look to the trans activists whose pocket they've been in for years, that they have in fact left the building. But I think they have left the building.
Well, I think that's very, very significant. Eric Kaufman, this is turning into a sort of culture war segment. You are an expert on what other people might call the culture wars. What does the Labour government do to that? Do you think this will kind of re-energise the culture wars, or do you think it's going to take the energy out of it?
I think it will energize it. Now, why do I say that? I don't think that Keir Starmer is going to come into office and start pushing anything on the culture wars. However, and this is a point that I've made elsewhere, all he has to do is essentially not do anything and essentially not put any restraints on activists within institutions, whether we're talking universities, the NHS, schools, etc. And the signaling coming from Starmer and Labour is essentially, this is all culture war stuff, and any attempt to scrutinize that is divisive. And therefore, that is a way of running interference to allow activists within the institutions full throttle. And so my belief is that this is going to go at a faster pace in institutions, and it's going to be more entrenched.
And also, so you're looking, for example, at Harriet Harman, who may take over the EC. What's the body called again?
The Equality and Human Rights Commission. Yes. That sort of thing. Will they? Are they going to implement the debanking? Are they, the law? Are they going to implement the academic?
So you take a different view to CAF, basically. You think this is going to?
There's the other thing I would say is this. I think we're at the beginning of what I think is going to be a more interesting phase, which is the internal civil war within both parties. So Tories are undoubtedly, Sunak is going to resign, and there's going to be a leadership contest, and you're going to have two factions, the more national conservative and the more liberal conservative, that are going to be duking it out. Then on the Labour side, okay, Starmer gets in with this big majority, big backbench group, a lot of places for the left, cultural left of the party, which, let's face it, if you take Labour activists, the kind of person that joins the Labour Party, they are, I'm sorry, I mean, overwhelmingly
he's eliminated most of the problems from his backbench already.
Kathleen Stock isn't woke, and she's just said that
not
she's
woke,
happy to see Labour.
And Rosie Duffield isn't woke, and I agree.
There's lots of Labour supporters that aren't woke. I mean, George Galloway's not even woke.
No, there's a lot of Labour voters.
He's not
there's a lot of Labour voters who aren't woke.
But he's on the left.
But Labour activists is who I'm talking about, coming out of, university activist circles, unions, particularly top end of the public service unions.
Try.
They are. How long is Starmer going to be able to hold the ring against not only them, and there are also individuals within his own team, I think, who are more, hospitable to this. If you look at the Biden administration, for example, these people made a lot of headway in steering
that's
the direction.
An interesting comparison, actually, because Biden also was someone who has sort of sat back and been quite kind of stately about some of these, what he would call cultural questions, and they have actually progressed quite rapidly. And Keir Starmer also has taken a bit of a a more distant approach.
I agree, and now what I think is going to be interesting is as these stories break into the press now, instead of the line being the National Health Service is doing this crazy stuff, or the universities are doing this crazy stuff, the Tories will be, this is what Labour is all about, right? So that'll be the new narrative. It's going to be interesting to see whether Starmer feels the need to placate and sort of tack to the centre, or whether he's feeling pressure from his backbenches, from that big majority, from the activists.
Because in a way, again, the paradox here is that you would think if you have a huge majority, that makes you totally fine and totally safe, and you're king of the world and you can do what you want. But of course, the opposite side of that is if you're a backbench MP in a government that has a big party that has a big majority in government, you feel much more at liberty to rebel. So the factions of the Labour Party, I think, will probably come to light much faster because of this strong majority.
And in addition, he's got very little wiggle room on the economy. There's no money in the till. If you start to borrow a lot of money, the rating agencies are going to come after you. And so I just don't think he's going to be able to deliver economically for the train drivers and various. So he can't do anything on the economic side. So he's going to have to give cultural stuff.
You were saying this a bit earlier, Kathleen. Explain that to us. So you feel if he can't do it much economically, it's going to be cultural.
I don't have a special insight. I just read what everyone else reads. But if Morgan McSweeney is serious about having kind of blue label.
Morgan McSweeney is the brain.
The Svengali guy behind.
He's the sort of Dominic Cummings equivalent. Steve Hilton equivalent of this Starmer project.
So the story goes, according to Tom McTague, he's sort of blue Labour, basically. So that's not woke. That's actually quite right-wing. It's socially conservative. It's about it's communitarian, basically. It's about grassroots coming up rather than imposing things top-down. And it's about patriotism, nationalism, and all those sorts of things. And that does fit with the way that they've branded themselves. They've tied themselves up in the flag. They'll be wearing poppies. He loves his country now. All of that stuff. He's also ruthlessly excised left-wing candidates before they even got to the ballot. And he's put in his own people like Luke Akehurst, his own kind of his, what do you call it, that Italian, the mafia... capos or whatever. So you're kind of, it sounds like more convinced that I just think I read
transformation.
them as it'd be crazy for them to suddenly go off on a tangent and introduce some radical gender policy, or they have got this race equality unit act that they want to introduce, and that I don't fully understand why, because it's already illegal to discriminate against people.
Well, we will have to get you both back in a year, and we'll see which way it turns out it went.
Right.
One party we have not talked about is the Liberal Democrats.
No, we haven't.
And I feel like it would be remiss of us not to spend some time on the Liberal Democrats. We said that the big stories are reform, Tories sort of outperforming their worst expectations. The Lib Dems have done pretty well. They've gone from how many MPs was it prior?
They've gone up 55 or something, haven't they?
Yeah, it's an enormous. They are the positive spin, and you're going to give me the negative in a moment because I've had a sneak preview of your article for UnHerd tomorrow, which is not kind about the Liberal Democrats. But the positive spin is that this is a remarkable political party. They are reduced to almost nothing, and they spring back with. They are incredibly good local campaigners. You look at the map, and there is now maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe more seats all the way down the southwest of England.
Yeah.
What is it? Where's their magic?
There's no magic. And I don't know exactly where these seats are, but the southwest has always been a stronghold for Liberals. Going back centuries, and they're probably just recapping what they had. So I live in a what's bound to be a Lib Dem constituency that went blue for a short time. I just think, again, it's not that they've won; it's that that the Conservatives lost, and so they've taken the spoils. But it's not because of their campaign, which was, as I write in tomorrow's UnHerd, one of the worst things I've ever seen. Just totally infantilizing, soft-hearted, soft-minded, no scrutiny on their actual policies, just banging on about his
you
dead
mean you didn't
parents
like
and
Ed Davey doing kayaking?
I did not. I thought
jumping
it was
into cold
actually
water.
insulting to the electorate. I thought it was disgusting, actually. I really did. I'm sorry to say I thought it was positively disgusting.
It seems to have worked pretty well.
Well, no. I would like to know. I say this in my article, but, I want people to... Correlation is not causation. So now we need... was it the campaign that swung it? Because if we don't root this out now, then in 4 years' time, God knows what they'll be doing, like shooting them out cannons and God knows what.
In this room, and I include Flo, who I can see just on the other side of the camera, would be able to summarize the Lib Dem platform in a few sentences?
Carers.
The carers, okay.
So,
Eric, what are they about?
Okay, so I live in a constituency that is a toss-up between the Tories and the Lib Dems, and Vince Cable was among those who came around, and I asked Vince Cable, I said, tell me what the difference is between Labour and the Lib Dems, and he said,
well, you've got a good point there. You didn't really have an answer. And another time, some other campaigners for the Lib Dems came by and got the same answer. So
they really don't have a policy offer.
What they have got is gender self-ID. I mean, they are crazy on the gender stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's two big differences. They're very pro-gender self-ID, and they are pro-re-entering the European Union. That's pretty different.
Yeah, sure, but I mean, the fact that on the doorstep they were hard-pressed to come up with anything, right? I think that tells us that...
This is a vote against, and they just happen to be who your vote. If you live in a constituency that's sort of upper middle class, you'll vote for the Lib Dem.
So basically they had a strategy of targeting places with a Gales Bakery, which is this sort of insufferable brioche.
Is that I believe the owner is actually very much not a Liberal Democrat, but that's a whole other story. Reform, Eric, because I've heard you give very eloquent disquisitions on how, for the past few years, your thesis, I'm just going to mangle it now on a live stream, but as I understood it, is the Tories, if they wanted to do better, needed to become more right-wing, needed to lead into culture war issues, and needed to be a little bit more reformy. Do you feel like you're vindicated, or do you feel something else? How do you interpret the result like that?
Reform fits into the broader realignment pattern, whereby it's essentially cultural right is where a lot of this is going.
You look across Europe, you look at what's happening in France and the Netherlands and so on. So this is very much within that framework. What's interesting to me is reform
has overperformed, if this is correct. They've overperformed expectations. What does that mean then for that Tory culture war or internal civil war that's going to happen with the resignation? That's what's interesting to me. Is I think it very much makes the case that essentially the Tories have to reconnect with their voters, who are 90% want reduced immigration. The Tories obviously boosted immigration. That shows you the disconnect between the Tory elite and the realignment.
Forgive me for interrupting, but what's just happened is that they now have a party, those guys, and it's called Reform, and it now will most likely have a bunch of MPs, and Conservatives, the 130 that remain, will say, well, the place where we survived was the south of England. The parliamentary party that exists now is way more centrist, way more sort of one nation, as they call it, than the previous version of the Tory party. And the Eric Kaufman kind of thesis, sent him to reform. Let him try to build up reform and let the Tory party return to being a kind of centre-right kind of party.
See, even in the seats they retained, I don't think they are going to be the most sort of left-leaning seats and the most liberal seats. So it'll be interesting to me. I think they're going to be the most elderly seats, but I think you have an elderly but cultural conservative voter that's sticking with the Tories. They may even have voted Remain, but they are anti-immigration. So I actually think anyone who does the attitudes, does the numbers, will realize actually there is no future, I think, for the Tories to go in this direction of sort of, market liberalism with kind of very loose immigration. I just think that's a very narrow coalition. And there's no real way. Instead of just looking at where they are, they have to look at where they were in 2019, which means they have to get into the red wall. They have to get into that working class cultural conservative vote.
I got to say, I feel like you're going to have to update some of this because it's a different Tory party as of quite potentially tomorrow.
130
to be continued. Kathleen,
yes.
Eric, thank you so much.
Thanks, Freddie.
We are now going to go on another tour of the UnHerd Club party. And our very own Florence Reed is going to take a microphone and see what some of the other guests think. Off you go.
I'm going to try and get some responses to that exit poll. It is, I suppose, what lots of people were expecting, with some unexpected twists with the Lib Dem success and also reform. So let's see if we can get some people here. Dan Sam, I want you on this live stream. Tell me, what's your response to the exit poll as we saw?
Thanks.
Not too surprising, I don't think.
What about Reform 13, Lib Dem surprise?
Yeah, well, Reform definitely did a bit better than many people were expecting.
Why do you think that is? Why is it that is it shy Reform voters, or what's happened there that means that they've done slightly better than anyone might have imagined?
I think Farage is a very charismatic individual, and he really has caught the imagination of a big swathe of the population.
There's the youth vote there as well.
And that's it, I think. I think a lot of people, 18 to 24, have seen him on I'm a Celeb. They've seen him doing his TikToks, and they're like, yeah, why not? Let's change. Let's just throw it in there. And I think, they might even be influencing their parents and say, Mum, Dad, why don't you go this way? And
there could be a kind of reverse, gerontocratic absorption.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Let's get in here. Billy, you're going to have to come through the crowd with me. Let's get some responses. Hi, guys. I'm looking for responses to the exit poll. What do you think? No, nothing. They're so excited about the exit poll that they literally are speechless. Okay, let me find my way into the crowd here. Responses to the exit poll, I'm afraid. The microphone's coming to you. Tell me, what is your response to that exit poll? Is it what you expected? Is it something out of the norm? Do you feel that there is a surprise here? Is there a shock story that we should all be thinking about?
Well, I don't think it's a massive surprise. I think it's pretty much aligned with what we were all expecting. And I think we've just got to roll with it. And the question is actually, will it all align in the morning?
So once we actually find out the real results, then we'll really know?
Yes. All to be revealed.
All to play for still. I mean, the polls are not it. As we know from the past, they can be vastly wrong, and we never know. By the end of the day, we might be seeing something very different to what we've heard this morning. Let me have a look through. I've got some journos here who look very worried about my microphone, so I'm going to try and shove it in front of them. I need to get your take on this. Yeah. Exit poll, how do we feel? Do you think it's accurate? Do you think it reflects what we thought was going to happen? Do you think there might be a shock by the morning?
I think it is surprising how well the Tories have done. It's surprising how well Reform has done.
What do you think that is? What's the reason for that?
I suppose secret voters, what are they called?
Shy Tories.
Shy Tories voting Reform. No one wants to, admit to that, do they?
Well, maybe by tomorrow they'll be more gung-ho about the whole thing.
I think so. There's sort of network effects of realising that other people think as you do.
Do you think there's a mobilization of a new right in this country? Because that's what it suggests. At least Reform seems to represent something about a new populist uprising that might be happening here. Is that something you're sensing as well?
Yes, I am. And I mean, it's happening all over Europe. It's got to be coming here. And this is the first taste of it, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, guys. Can I grab your opinions on the exit poll? I just want to know what you think. Is it what you thought was going to happen? Are there any surprises in the numbers that we should be looking at? What's your take on the exit poll?
Pretty thrilled, to be honest. I had my bets on 160 for the Tories, so 131. It's a win.
So lower was better in your case.
Yeah, perhaps I was a bit of a pessimist. To be honest, it's quite interesting that the Lib Dems have gotten such a surge.
They seem to have surged. Do you think this is like people responding well to Ed Davies' Zumba classes with pensioners? What is it that can explain that sudden Lib Dem spike?
I mean, I feel like the Southwest has always been sort of Lib Dem before Labour. I did some reporting on Somerton and Frome in my time. So, yes, I find it quite interesting that we've got such a Southwest move towards the Lib Dems.
And yourself, any surprises there, or do you think it's all business as usual?
I think a depressingly large number of Reform seats, but maybe to be expected. I don't know. I think Yeah, I think maybe we in the Westminster bubble should have seen it coming, but...
So maybe it's one of those populist shocks that have happened again and again, and yet Westminster refuses to notice them happening.
I think that we see ourselves as entirely divorced from Europe, but given all the, right-wing, young resurgence in populist movements in Europe, we're not immune from that. And try as we might to leave Europe, I think we're absolutely susceptible to their political trends. So I think that might...
Nigel Farage and Bardella maybe, becoming slowly closer and closer.
And Bardella, what, 28? 28? God, I'm jealous. No, I'm not.
Me too. If only I had that much ambition at 28. Okay, let's have a look through the crowd, see if we can find anyone else. Reactions to the exit poll. We're looking for reactions to the exit poll. Is this what you thought was going to happen, or is this a surprise? Any shock?
Yeah, it was definitely a surprise, because I think considering the polls from yesterday or whatever, I saw like Lib Dems and Tories were a lot closer together. But actually, in some ways, it's looking a lot better for the Tories in that sense than what was predicted.
Almost like a surprise, clutching victory from the jaws of defeat.
Well, I think perhaps they'll actually be able to be the main side in opposition. So.
That has to be enough for them at this point.
Yeah, I think exactly. So yeah.
Slim pickings for the Tories.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Slim pickings for the Tories. Okay, let's head back into the room and go back and see what Freddie's doing in there.
Yeah, if you enjoyed that somewhat hectic tour of the UnHerd Club election party, thank you to Flo Reid for that. I'm not sure if anyone made any sense, but we want you with us in the room. That is the whole objective of this very innovative election night coverage. We have Mary Harrington back, and Inaya following Iman, another favourite of ours here at UnHerd. I literally just grabbed you. I grabbed you in a non-politically incorrect way, just like to make that clear. We have to be very careful these days. I appropriately gestured towards the podcast booth and said, "Would you like to join us?" And you have. So let me come to you. What's your reaction? Is it exactly as you predicted, or is there some variation?
Well, the Conservatives have done a bit better than what I expected. I think Reform winning 13 seats seems to me to be a remarkable victory for them. Remember with UKIP that they only won one seat. And the SNP have obviously lost many seats. Actually, Reform are going to have more
We need to get your mic closer to your mouth, sorry.
Oh, there we go, like this?
Yeah.
Is this
Just
better?
Hold
Should I
like
hold
that.
it? Okay, cool.
We've got these kind of Britney mics to try.
So
the Reform. And are you pleased to see that? Are you worried about that? What's your reaction to the relative success of Reform?
I think that it may not do a lot when it comes to Parliament. Obviously, the Speaker of the House is unlikely to go to Reform very much. But I think it's going to do a lot in terms of how the Conservative Party rebuild itself, what are going to be the ideologies and movements that are shaping it. I think on Sky News already we had a Tory big beast essentially say that this is already because the Conservative Party are moving too far to the right. And there's going to be a lot of voices saying, hold on, how can you argue that when Reform is winning in significant numbers and many people that were otherwise vote Conservative are now voting Reform. So I think that it's going to say a lot for the future of the right.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but I find the whole argument of, should the Tories move to the right or should they move to the left? It's so obvious that you can make both arguments. It seems to me quite clear that the Tories are a divided group. Parties are supposed to be coalitions, and in their case, the coalition seems to be too broad, and there is a group that believes in a certain group of much sort of softer, South of England friendly type policies. Let's call it the South of England version of Boris Johnson, and then there's the kind of slightly more reformy group, and they're not reconcilable.
I'm not sure that you can make the argument both ways. If we are still thinking about 2019, obviously it's now 5 years ago, but they somehow managed in their bombastic way to maintain the coalition between the kind of southern traditional Tory voters and the 2019 Red Wallers. For many people, that so-called realignment is still awaiting to be fully harnessed. Now, a lot has changed since then, and then you can't recreate the conditions of 2019. But I still think that there is a gap into speaking to that coalition of voters that are concerned about immigration, identity, meaning, and also the a kind of redistribution type of economics or a much more interventionist state. I still think there's an open space there.
So the old phrase that became popular for a while, leaning left on the economy, leaning right on culture. I remember that was popular about 2 or 3 years ago. You still have some faith that that might be the formula.
Well, it's quite interesting. If you actually listen to some of the things that Nigel Farage is saying, he's not really talking about the rehashed Thatcherism that we've known him for the last 10, 20 years. He's shifting slightly.
I mean, he wants to pretty much ban inheritance tax. He's the only person talking about changing the free at the point of use NHS funding
but
formula.
For example, he said that he would remove the cap on two-child benefit. He's also talked about incentives for people having more children. There seems to be a slight
He's definitely
shift.
become a bit more sort of faith family flag in recent years, Nigel, hasn't he? Mary, one name we haven't spoken much about is Boris Johnson, because he's not running in this election. Why would we? Except when you talk about the factors that existed in 2019 and how they managed to stitch together this apparent contradiction, a lot of that was about the person of Boris Johnson, surely. He was this weird sort of hologram that could appear to be one thing from the position of the affluent South, reassuringly metro-liberal, and from the Red Wall he appeared to be kind of jingoistic, politically incorrect, and a bit kind of stick it up and no one else exists like that. Rishi Sunak certainly didn't manage that sort of magic trick, and maybe it was always a magic trick and it was a coalition that can't stick together. What say you to that, Mary?
Well, I do know people who voted for Brexit in 2016 because they hoped that it would split the Conservative coalition and finally destroy the Tory party. And I know, and those people whom I know who voted for Brexit for that reason are now celebrating, because nearly 10 years after, it took a bit longer than they expected, but that seems finally to have happened. That the contradictions which were bound up in the European Union have finally ripped apart that Conservative coalition. So on the one hand, the economic liberals, and on the other hand, the cultural conservatives. And actually, I remember during the Brexit campaign, when I was leafleting for Brexit, because I campaigned for Brexit, I joined Vote Leave, and I campaigned for Brexit. And I remember noticing very palpably the difference between the Vote Leave voters and the Vote Leave campaigners and the Grassroots Out, which was Nigel Farage's. And demographically, they were very different constituencies. And it was also very clear that Grassroots Out, bluntly on the basis of class.
So what?
The Vote Leave campaign was middle class, and the Grassroots Out one was not. They had different sensibilities, which fell out of that, and they had different.
What does that mean for?
And they also had different policy interests, which fell out of that. And that was a vote coalition which was never going to hold together, because one side wanted Brexit for more economic liberalisation, and the other wanted Brexit for more cultural conservatism, and that was always going to come to a head. And everything which has happened since has just borne that out.
What do you think that means? I see we have John Meyer in the corner who's going to come and join. Do you come and join us, John? What do you think this means for tomorrow's Tory party?
Well, I don't think tomorrow's Tory party is going to be for much longer, bluntly. I mean,
what does that mean? They've just survived. I mean, the predictions of the complete annihilation of the Tory party were wrong.
Well, I think Inaya is right to point to the argument which is about to happen, where big beasts in the Tory party are all going to go on television and say, oh, we need to tack to the centre. And this is obviously happening because some imagined right-wing lurch took place, which has obviously doomed us in the eyes of a centrist double liberal electorate. And the big beasts are going to argue that because that's just what they always say. And it's going to be very difficult for them to argue that when, in fact, they lost most of their votes to a party which campaigned still broadly within the centre-right, but some distance to the right of the current Tory party. And
But now, I'm going to come to John here as well. John, I will introduce John as one of our new regular contributors and columnists at UnHerd. The fact that as of, again, I'm going to do my mainstream media timid crap
you
thing
do it so
here
well.
And say, we don't know what's going to happen yet, because we don't. And who knows? My hunch, again, let's just put it out there, I could be judged wrong, is that actually they probably underplayed the reform seats. My guess is if you're putting together this exit poll and you're coming out with 13 reform seats, which is very bold, if there's any way to tweak it to be more modest, you're going to do that. So I would not be surprised if there's more than 13 reform seats come tomorrow lunchtime. But either way, there's going to be a parliamentary reform party, and that changes this whole conversation.
Yes,
The old conversation about the Tory party needs to be updated.
I think the fact that Farage has a seat in the Commons now completely changes his profile, imbues him with kind of dignity that he's never had and has long wanted. I kind of think that result strikes me as quite good for them. I mean, Rishi should be pleased with that. I mean, and I guess it's an artifact of the coverage we've had up until now, where there's been this ratcheting effect, where the polls that are most devastating for the Tories get coverage. That this can be packaged as a kind of, clawing back of some of the sort of more devastating possibilities.
I don't know. It's terrible. Inaya?
Just looking at the constituency breakdown, there's still dozens that are too close to call, so that is still quite interesting. There may well be a lot of shifts, but I also think the popular vote will be very interesting. Already we're seeing some of the predictions that Labour are only getting 36%, so a huge majority on what is a pretty low, I would say, percentage. And it's interesting, obviously, the Liberal Democrats are getting far more seats on what looks like will be a less popular vote than the Reform Party.
And quite possibly, we had Uber geek James Canazagoriam on about an hour ago, and his thought is that most likely Labour have won this with fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2017, which is quite an impressive little factoid that's going to be awkward for him going forward.
Well, exactly. It makes you think that, whilst they've got this majority, their support is still relatively shallow. So you do wonder then, will Keir Starmer have the authority, have the confidence to do all of these radical things that people are expecting? Maybe he will be much more cautious then.
And we shouldn't fall victim to the kind of characteristic commentator's disease and risk ignoring the obvious, which is that this is a colossal landslide.
You're right to call us up on that. And every 10 minutes of this broadcast, I am just going to pinch myself and let's say the obvious, which is this is an effing disaster
for them. Yes,
they had a big majority, a huge possibility. They had a huge opportunity in 2019, and they have screwed it up in a way that people will learn about in history books for decades to come.
Yes.
But I think what will be interesting will be seeing what Starmer does first, because that will tell us a lot about where he sees his premiership going and where he feels vulnerable. So, I mean, if he's promised lots of things to lots of different people. He's promised to sort of waved his hands around on trans rights, he's waved his hands around on race, and he's waved his hands around on, things which are appealing to the left of his party. And he's also promised to gut the unwritten constitution of Britain and find and complete the Brownite modernisation project. And I think which of those he goes for first will tell us a lot about where he feels vulnerable and who he's in hock to, or who he feels he owes red meat to.
Well, with 10 SNP MPs, is that it? Yes. So not more of that, not more devolution.
That's another amazing result.
Very satisfying, that one, I thought.
Why is it so satisfying, John? Tell us.
Well, I guess the basic line being that I'm not Scottish.
Skin in the game? This is. We're supposed to be unheard here, and now we're opining and saying how satisfying the Scottish National Party destruction is.
Well, they did say it was a de facto independence referendum. So if that's the case, then
that's not a great sign for them, is it?
Exactly.
That's always the risk with playing that kind of strategy, isn't
Mary,
it?
I'm going to sub you out for a moment. I feel like I'm the New England manager
Off the
here.
bench.
Putting people. I have Suzanne Moore just over there, and we're going to say hello to Suzanne. So we are about to be joined by Suzanne Moore. Here she is. You have a manual mic today, which means that if you wanted to break into song, you could.
Please don't worry about that. Anybody.
We can silence the music outside. Suzanne, are you happy or sad today, having seen that result?
I'm excited to have a new, vaguely competent government, but I'm quite disturbed by this reform.
Okay.
Projection of 13 seats. I mean, it certainly does mean an absolute realignment of the right, and I'm shocked. I mean, because we were predicting one or two, maybe 3 seats.
Yeah.
So that Reform has done this is really significant. So that's the thing that's
when
hitting
you say
me.
you're worried about it, I'm going to make the argument here, like, is it not a good thing if a strain of opinion that is obviously held by a sizable subset of the population is represented in Parliament? Does that not make for a more healthy democracy?
There is that argument, and there's going to be a push, I think, after this election for PR in a way that there really hasn't been before.
Although Labour has no incentive to actually act on it,
as
ever.
Yeah. But I mean, we're going to see the percentage of people who voted Reform, and I mean, it's a strange alliance here, isn't it, of the sort of left and right on PR.
Are you in favour of it?
Yes, I am, and I'm also kind of concerned. I know, I do realise that, and I'm also concerned about those recent polls which were kind of splitting the gender, saying young men going to Reform, young women going to Green. I think that's a kind of very interesting.
Yeah, I guess that's in line with the more general trend where young women are breaking Progressive and young men are kind of reacting slightly to it.
And obviously, because of my position on women's rights, as far as I'm concerned, yes, I'm really happy to have a Labour government, but for me, the fight starts tomorrow, actually, because we know that Labour are so split.
You've been a real leader on this issue of, how what type of feminism is being pushed with some of these new gender ideas. We had Kathleen Stock here 10 minutes ago, and she was sounding pretty convinced that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer now has kind of genuinely changed, and she doesn't sound very worried that they're going to be pushing all sorts of crazy things. Do you share her sort of optimism?
No, I don't. I think they're still quite confused. I think that the messaging has been so sort of ambivalent. One person has said one thing, one has said another. I look at someone like Annalise Dodds, it's just like being at parents' evening with the worst teacher, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't trust them on this. I don't trust Lammy on this. I don't trust Keir on this, actually. So I think the push will come from within the Labour Party. And also I think it's been quite ignored up until really sort of about a week before the election. They were just saying, gender's not a thing, no one cares, it's not on the doorsteps, no one says this. Everybody I've spoken to who has been canvassing has said no, that it is actually raised on the doorstep. So what do you believe on that? What do you believe?
No, I completely agree. One thing that's quite interesting is that the head of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, Baroness Kishma-Faulkner, who's been very good on this issue, her term is coming to an end, and if it was Kemi Badenoch, she was going to renew it. But there are talk that Harriet Harmond is going to potentially be taking over from her. And she has said trans women are women. She's totally dismissed any of the discussion around single-sex spaces and so on. So I would expect that a lot of this stuff may well continue.
I have a lot of respect for Harriet and what she's done for women, but I'm also really old. So I remember as soon as Blair got in 97, Harriet was used to cut single-parent benefits, and if Harriet is used again to do this stuff, I will be extremely disappointed.
I don't think it's at the top of their agenda, though, right? Is it? I think the best you can hope for maybe is it's just kind of a low-priority issue. And I guess if the Cass report is anything to go by, there are encouraging signs that the extra political institutions in this country are a good check on crazy.
Well, then that's where we look at the SNP vote, right? Because they've
collapsed,
decimated, and who knows exactly why. But I would say that part of it is this.
Definitely part of the defenestration of surgeon was that. But Suzanne, I think some viewers will be curious about this because over the past 5 years there's been such a lot of confusion about right and left and who's right wing and who's left wing, and you've been accused of becoming a kind of right winger because you are so-called gender critical in your feminist viewpoint. You've written for UnHerd, you now write for the Daily Telegraph, and yet here you are. It's election night. We just had a Labour victory, and you say you're pleased to see a Labour government. Do you still feel like a lefty?
Well, yes. I mean, if this is the big question, what is left? To me, the left is people who believe in redistribution, equality, all these basic things. I'm signed up to that. Therefore, on something like gender, I don't think it's just a simple matter of identification or individuality. I think it's a much more collective, socially constructed idea. So I know, I'm just one of those people who don't think that they've left the left. They think the left has slightly abandoned them.
And I'm allowed to ask, I don't know if you've written about who you were going to vote for.
You can ask me, sure.
Who did you vote for?
I spoilt my ballot because I live in Diane Abbott's constituency, and I'm afraid that I couldn't really vote for somebody who I don't feel is very well, and I feel actually personally sorry that it's ended up the way it has, actually. Yeah. But if I did, so I had and it's a safe seat, so I had the luxury of a protest vote. So I said, respect my sex if you want my ex. That was the thing I wrote.
You wrote it on the...
Yeah. And I mean, I know that's kind of, to many people, pathetic.
Futile gesture.
Yes.
It's going to be read by somebody in a leisure centre at 3 a.m.
Of course.
Well, but set it on a
but the alternative,
extremely popular overnight live
I mean, I haven't always voted. I'm not one of those people who thinks everyone has to vote. I don't tell anyone else how to vote. Within my own family, we've had many discussions and arguments because one of my daughters lives in Corbyn's constituency. One of my daughters is a huge Corbynite. You know, we discuss these things, and in the end, I actually do like the fact that people can just go and, you know, it sounds a very old-fashioned thing, but I like that you can go in the end and do what you want. You know, but it's not a pencil anymore.
Oh, mine was a pencil.
Mine wasn't a pencil.
Oh, what did you have?
I had a pencil.
I'm in Hackney. We have posh.
Oh,
it's
a fountain pen or something.
No, it was like a little pen thing.
Oh.
I don't know.
That's strange. I thought it was always a pencil.
Me too.
I thought the pencil had a kind of quasi-constitutional
We're addressing the really big issues tonight. That's what we promised people.
Radical.
And here we are.
That sounds dodgy to me.
Suzanne, I'm going to let you get back in a moment. I just want to
This is a great party. I have to say I've been at the
Come again.
Yes.
I've watched Lammy speak tonight in person. And
that was at one of our a sister publication, a friendly collegiate...
Yeah, the New Statesman, yes. And Lammy was talking about
book.
when he's foreign secretary, and I just didn't know that was a shoo-in. Is that a shoo-in?
I think it would be very strange not to make him foreign secretary, given...
Yeah, I've heard very mixed things about that. I mean, I would agree with you that it would be strange because he's done so much policy work, seemingly on this progressive realism idea.
Progressive realism is not a thing. I'm sorry.
I agree with you, but at least he's put it out there. But the other side
what
is
will
that...
Donald Trump think about David Lammy?
Well, exactly. You know, he's
Will he
really
talk to
bashed Donald Trump in his past comments, and that may well prove quite difficult.
I think my sources tell me that the Lammy team have been making a very big outreach to Donald Trump's team. In fact, they've kind of love bombing them, and they're meeting every official they possibly can. So I think I'm just throwing predictions out on this live stream. One of them is this Labour Party is going to surprise everyone by how unbelievably friendly they are with the future Trump administration.
Well, just on
Best
that point
buddies.
about Donald Trump, it's kind of quite funny now that perhaps the UK's closest person to Donald Trump is now Nigel Farage, who is in Parliament.
Well,
so
yeah.
we don't know what he's going to be telling his best friend.
That is all going to be interesting, isn't it, to see what happened. And just on the way here, I mean, the classic cab conversation. The man said, "What we need is more Donald Trump." So you know, this is what's happening.
I've got a Mary over there who I know is keen to get back. Panel, thank you so much. Thank you. You can go back to the party now.
Thank you.
We're dissolving.
We're dissolving this particular parliament. Thank you so much. Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, so I'm going to take a very short break when we're going to find out what happens next. But we have spoken to a wide variety of people already this evening. I would be keen to see if there's anyone else that we should be dragging out of the party. Flo, do you want to come and talk to... I'm going to bring to the stage, for the first time this evening, Florence Reed. I feel like if there were audible applause, we'd be hearing it right now.
I can feel it reverberating through the airwaves.
The singularity has happened. We are both on the same broadcast.
They never know.
Normally, Flo does a lot of interviews, just as I do, and the comments under the YouTube are very often saying that we look similar. Are we married? Are we brother and sister? what is the relationship? I can say we are close colleagues and nothing more than that.
Professional only.
Professionally associated.
Not a Nepo hire.
It was not a Nepo hire.
Despite their best interests.
You stunned everyone by saying that you were going to vote Green at our hustings. We had Peter Hitchens and Matthew Goodwin and Rod Liddell and Rowena Davis, and then you saying vote Green. Did you?
Well, that's between me and the ballot box, Freddie. I'm afraid I'm going to be coy on
Oh,
this
come
one.
on, I'm allowed to ask.
My journalistic professionalism requires me to remain neutral, or at least as neutral as I possibly can be.
Right, but it allowed you to do a hustings where you made the case to vote Green.
Well,
So-
look, you know, we can all argue the case. I think actually the Green case is quite easy to argue in this chaotic moment we're in. I think,
and it looks like, I'm looking at the numbers, it looks like there could be two Green seats.
Or
They were
maybe
going
3.
for 4, or maybe 3.
Yeah, I'm hoping for 3.
Which would be a big result for the Greens.
I think so. I mean, it sounds like Greens and Reform have done kind of unusually well, and it's the smaller parties that have won out on the day. The big parties seem to have just kind of sapped energy from the populace, and the small parties are what's kind of giving them a bit of joie de vivre and getting them down to the polling station. So I'm actually glad for that. I think it's a real testament to our strange system that we have over here. There's nothing like the American system, and it's a good thing to see. I'm very happy for it.
Okay, we are going to leave it there for now. We promised 9:30 till 11. We've gone a little bit later than that. I'm going to take a pause. We're going to try and digest what exactly is about to happen or has just happened. We haven't even had the first result yet. What happens now is that we get a few early constituencies. There'll be one at 11:30, one at 12, and then there'll be a big sudden rush at around 2 o'clock in the morning. And just I was about to call time on this broadcast, but I see Lord Glassman is in the room. I'm talking about Maurice Glassman, the founder of Blue Labour, the architect of what has, I suppose, been an influential pressure group, at least, and may still, he's coming for me now, and may yet become a big centrepiece of this new Labour government. Maurice Glassman, and Flo, if you find me any other willing victims, bring them through. Lord
Never
Glassman,
enough for you,
the
Freddie.
founder of Blue Labour,
Yes.
sitting here at the UnHerd Club. Was I with you 5 years ago, thereabouts, on election night 2019, or
no,
did I just
2019,
fabricate that memory?
I was sitting with my family, but I did
see.
write a
I
big piece for
fabricated
UnHerd
that.
called
Yes.
All Hail Good King Boris.
I remember.
So that's
and that
what you're
really,
thinking of.
Yeah, that did not win you many friends in the Labour Party, but
No.
you were excited about Boris in 2019.
No,
you
if
thought he was a bit...
If you read what I said, there was a huge lament for how rubbish my party was and taking the wrong turn on Brexit. What I appreciated with Boris was that Brexit is absolutely necessary for the future of our country, and we've done it. So now we can move. Now we've got a Labour government that says we're not rejoining the EU. I'm kind of, now you're looking at me kind of
Well,
excited.
are you excited by this? I mean, do you see, when that 10 o'clock moment happened and it said, admittedly, a slightly less dramatically enormous victory than some somewhat hysterical pollsters.
The evening's not over yet.
That is also true. Did you feel, what did you feel? Emotions?
I feel, look, I'm Labour to my bones. I feel like Spurs, when they get a 2-1 victory and it's not that deserved, I'm happy. I'm really pleased. We're going to have a proper Labour government. I'm obviously very hopeful there's going to be industrial strategy, industrial policy.
Right. That's something you've been arguing for a long time.
I'm very hopeful that Labour will, as it deepen and intensify our relationship with Ukraine. I think that offers huge possibilities because of their precious metals for us to have an industrial strategy.
Right, so industrial strategy is something where you feel that this incarnation of the party might listen to you a little bit.
I think it's up for grabs, yeah.
More generally, and we've also been talking about this earlier this evening with Kathleen Stock, with Suzanne Moore, how blue is this Labour Party? Because it's hard to get your head around. What happens is Keir Starmer talks about, he wraps himself in the Union Jack, they sing the national anthem at Labour Party conference, etc. But all of those seem quite superficial things. do you feel there is a sort of genuine social conservatism in this Labour project, or is it just PR?
Oh, there's definitely... It's a Labour party, it's not a new Labour. And Labour historically has always been quite profoundly socially conservative. And it's an unnoticed thing from the historical Liberal Labour supporting thing that calmly... So the Reform vote hasn't taken votes from Labour, it's taken votes from the Conservative.
I think both. If you look at the...
Yeah, but Labour's held a strong working class support in lots of areas. There's been a lot of switching back to Labour, and that's because Labour has spoken to the constituency it lost and has really got out of its way not to upset them. It's preferred to upset. So
do you think you might play a bit of a role in this new Labour government?
Well,
are you offering your services
I
as a...
hope not, because, as you know, Freddie, I enjoy my life, and the idea of being a minister would be deeply disturbing to a lifestyle.
Or at least as a consigliere.
We're talking, it's a very good... so I would
You're
say...
talking to the leadership, to Keir Starmer?
Not Keir Starmer, but...
People in his orbit.
And Shadow Cabinet, and I think, Freddie, there's going to be surprises ahead, and you
Go
will
on, predict one or two for us. What might happen that we can't yet imagine?
Well, to give just one example, I think that Labour will intensify its relationship with Ukraine. And Ukraine really appreciates British support, and that relationship will enable us to have access to all the ingredients we need to have an industrial strategy. So,
I mean, this is really going to drive some of our audience, mad in not a good way, because what you're saying is we are going to. A new Labour government is going to become best friends with Ukraine in order to get minerals. I mean, this is the anti-war brigade's worst fear, that it's a cynical move.
Let the anti-war brigade go and pay homage to Putin. You know, there's a war on, and Britain stood up, and I think Labour will improve that. What's your problem with having reciprocal relationships? Is this wrong?
No, you're right that this is not the forum for a deep dive.
It's not the forum for a deep dive. Okay.
Into Ukraine policy, but
you just asked me for something, and I gave you something.
Yes, we are saved by the bell. Come in.
Hi.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Great to see you, Morris. Hi, Freddie.
Hi, lovely to see you. What is your view on Ukraine policy, and do you think that the new Labour? We've got the architect of Blue Labour here.
You're saying new a lot, Freddie. You're saying new.
We've got the architect
Labour.
of Blue Labour here. Do you believe, as an expert on such matters, that this new Labour government, not new Labour in the Blair sense, but this potentially government that will be new tomorrow, is Blue Labour-y? Do you think that's a really central question, isn't it? That how sort of conservative are they? How much have they learnt the lessons from all of those mad rejections of Brexit? How much should we believe what Keir Starmer is telling us?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I'm really not sure what we're getting here at all, apart from it's not going to be the Conservatives. And
well,
I
think it's going to be Labour.
Well, it's going to be Labour, but what exactly are we going to get?
We're going to get...
I mean, Keir has played a very canny game and, not alienated any of the groups that he needs to vote for him, I think. But I'm not sure exactly what we're getting. I did actually have a skim of the various manifestos, and Labour's is it's a lot of pros and a lot of pictures of Keir Starmer. But I did struggle slightly to get exactly what we're going to get with. So I'd be very interested to see how, in power, how they manage to juggle the different things that they have let different constituencies believe that they're going to stand for. But you tell us, Lord Glassman.
Yeah, look, the good news is that it's not new Labour. I mean, Blair was a globaliser. Blair was absolutely wrong in every assumption he made, that he thought the future was globalised. He thought that the future of Britain lay in the EU. things have really changed. And what's remarkable is that in a continent, like when Brexit happened, I don't know if you remember, but many people said, we're going to be a fascist state. Britain's going to be a fascist state. It's like Vichy here. Oh my God, it's like the Weimar Republic on the street. And France is going to vote for Le Pen, and Germany, the AfD is full ahead. And we vote for a moderate Social Democratic Party. It's sublime. What are you so worried about?
Right, so
Do you see what I mean? This is like a remarkable achievement.
Yes.
Labour is still there as in the affections of people as something they're going to vote for. The real story tonight is the absolute disintegration of the Conservative Party. And they've got no idea what they're going to do. So I would say that, what we're going to have is they're not going to be corrupt. I think that's the first thing. I think this is a bunch of straight people. And they've been very honest in saying, well, we don't quite know what, they're going to... But I think that the Labour tradition is deep in Labour, and they will orient themselves to being pro-working class, to industrial strategy. I don't think they'll go as far as look at welfare and do any reform, so that will keep bumbling along. I think it's going to be a Labour
you probably
government.
think this is a good thing, but you think he is much to the left of Tony Blair then? Keir Starmer.
No, you see, you're still working with lefty-righty. In many ways, Blair was a Trotskyist. He believed in entryism, he believed in the absolute power of the state to push his agenda. Keir Starmer's a lawyer. He's not like that. I think we've got to get over that, Freddie. That's a legacy of the French Revolution.
So give us a concluding way of how should we think about Keir Starmer then, if not?
I don't think we should think about Keir Starmer at all.
Well, he might well be Prime Minister by lunchtime tomorrow.
No, he is going to be Prime Minister, but what you're too young to remember
I'll take that.
Yeah, not that you're that young, that the last Labour Prime Minister was Jim Callaghan, who left off. How old were you in 79?
I was not yet.
You were not
in
yet
existence.
conceived, you see. So you, in Labour governments, the Prime Minister isn't strong. There's competing forces in the cabinet. Attlee was like that. Wilson was like that. Callaghan was like
unconvinced.
I don't know if that was true with Blair. I think Blair came in with right, this is my vision.
I'm saying Blair was not a Labour Prime Minister. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. So do you think Keir Starmer is a Labour Prime Minister in a way that Blair
That's exactly
wasn't?
what I'm saying. So what we're going to see is a genuine tussle, politics, balancing the interests. It's good news for you, Freddie. It's going to be a lot more interesting.
I'm going to bring on one final guest, which is the man we began with, Tom McTague.
Tom McTague, do you want me to go?
Shall
I make space for...
We have a third chair. Yeah. There's no need to...
Tom, good to see you. How are you?
Look at you with your handheld microphone.
Yeah, you've got...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I like Tom. I want everybody... I want your viewers to know I like Tom.
Well, okay. I like Tom too.
I like Morris.
What we were just saying, Tom, what we were just saying is what I was just saying, was that this would be a proper Labour government in that the Prime Minister won't be dominant. So if you remember Callaghan, Wilson, Attlee, the cabinet played a bigger role. Blair was a presidential French, American, I'm going to do this, going to do that. Starmer will balance interests in his cabinet. It will be a very different style, a proper Labour government, in other words.
Do you buy that?
I think I've always thought that Keir Starmer was a bit of a 1970s figure. Somebody said to me in the Labour Party...
He would have been Attorney General in the Callaghan government.
if you took a figure like Harold Wilson or James Callaghan and you showed him Keir Starmer, they would say, oh yeah, no, I can completely understand him. He makes perfect sense. He's a figure that would have fitted into any 1970s Labour government.
And Tom, there's another one.
But
okay.
what Morris is just saying, as I understand, is that he won't be presidential. He will be more collegiate. I mean, I don't think if we had Aaron Bastani here, who is a regular contributor of ours and definitely doesn't take that view, he would be outraged. He doesn't think he's been collegiate at all. He's been completely ruthless in banishing elements that he doesn't like.
No, I think among the people around him, they are. I would say I'm closer to Morris on this. Yes, he's been completely ruthless with the left of the party, but if you think of Bridget Phillipson, Johnny Reynolds, Rachel Reeves, these will be big figures.
We have just had. I've got to interrupt you for 1 minute. We've just had the first
big
actual
vote for reform
result.
Big vote for
which
reform.
Is that Bridget Phillipson has held her seat in Sunderland. Sunderland is typically the first constituency. There's a kind of, they take a great pride in counting very quickly. And she got, I know we don't have the detailed results.
Yeah, but Reform did very well. She got 20,000, Reform got 11,000. That's a big showing for Reform.
Yeah, and that's real Brexit
I'm going to do
well,
a TV panel. Keep our eye on that as the night goes on. But Tom, there's one minister who you're neglecting, which is John Healey at Defence, who I think is a really impressive and powerful figure. And I think he will grow as this. John
Absolutely.
Healey.
I think you could see there, that back to the 70s, you could imagine John Healey clashing with David Lammy, or something like that, you know, in a way that you've got a realist versus somebody who's not maybe quite so realist. And you could imagine that kind of...
that John Healey is a proper Labour minister. You know, you could see him in a 45 government, a 60s government, and he'd be Minister of Defence in every one of them.
But,
you know.
come on, the landscape has changed completely since the 1970s. I mean, in the 1970s, Labour were the party of the working class, and the unions had a big influence on Labour policy.
Well, please
and
God.
that is simply not the case anymore. And that's the whole problem Labour have had, is balancing the kind of the old constituency of support, the working class constituency, with the new middle class urban.
Well, you're going to see he hasn't done a bad job of it.
They've got elected. I mean, there's, you know, as far, unless there's some real surprises coming up. But to be in government, balancing those constituencies is a whole other challenge, isn't it?
Well, let the story begin.
I think Morris has been warning about this for a long time, hasn't he? And getting into trouble for it. But you know, I think that's true. What I'm interested in with Reform, because I mean, I wrote a piece for UnHerd about Morgan McSweeney, which talked about this and how he was trying to appeal to a new working class voting group.
It's gone off.
And I wonder whether that's harder when you have Reform, who are there,
Yeah,
trying
exactly.
to become that party.
Yeah, exactly. Reform are claiming that they really represent the working class in a way that Labour doesn't.
Was it more
I do think they've got a
50%
problem
of the
though. Who are going to be elected for Reform?
Yeah,
They're
but
going
for
to
Labour, what did they get?
It's always low in some
wealthy Conservatives in the South.
Who knows? I mean, they're going
percentages.
to be quite an interesting mixture,
So
I think.
what we're seeing though is that Labour is holding and increasing its support in working class constituent areas.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing.
There is some figure about Tony, but wasn't Tony Blair the first Prime Minister in a long time to win a majority of the working class? You know, that kind of idea that he didn't assemble that coalition. He did manage it.
He did, and what he did was systematically move away from that. I mean, that's...
I'm sorry to interrupt here. I just want to do a little bit of geekery here, because we've just had the first result, actual result, not the projection.
Not the projection.
And what we have in Horton and Sunderland South is that Bridget Phillipson got 47.1% of the votes. The Reform candidate got 29% of the vote.
Very good result.
Conservatives got 13%, and the Liberal Democrat got 5.7%. So what we can do is we can actually compare it with what the pollsters were forecasting, and all these so-called MRP polls, these very detailed polls, do a forecast for each constituency. And James Canazagorian, the guy who we had on this panel just a few minutes ago, runs a company called Focal Data. What they had predicted for this constituency was 52% Labour, i.e. more than what they got, which was 47%. They had predicted 27% for Reform, and what they got is 29%. And they had predicted 13% for Tory, and what the Tories got was 13.8%. This forecast, so it's basically pretty close, and this forecast ended up with 444 Labour votes. I just wonder whether we can seats. I wonder whether we can see in miniature in this constituency basically what the story of the night has been,
Not
which is
necessarily.
that roughly speaking, the big forecasted Labour majority has happened.
Yeah.
That's obviously the headline result, but the percentage share that was predicted for Labour is ever so slightly less. So there's a very slight tempering, even though they still have an overall majority. And the second story has to be the amazing breakout performance of Reform that has exceeded expectations.
That is the story, and
Yeah.
I don't know what Tom thinks because he's from around that way, but there was huge support for Brexit in the northeast and massive disaffection. So I
there's
think
a
there could
Brexit
be a
party.
regional,
Yes,
and the
that's right.
Brexit Party did very well. So it's still the case that Labour hasn't closed the deal with Sunderland working class, although the majority of people by quite a margin voted Labour. The important thing there is
You're welcome
reform.
to smoke, by the way.
I'm not really.
Yeah,
Do you mind if I smoke?
it might sound a bit sort of edgy podcast.
Have you got an ashtray?
Tom.
Yeah, on that point, I think if you
Thank
cast your
you,
mind
Freddie.
back and think about the coalition that Boris Johnson managed to assemble, it included a big part of the northeast. It included all the way from Bishop Auckland
Thank you so much.
to the coast, and
Transgressive, eh?
and if you think about the challenge that the Conservative Party is going to have now, there'll be a lot of voices, understandably, that'll say we need to move back into the centre, we need to elect a Liberal Conservative.
Yeah.
Now, they are going to have to answer this question, well, how is that person going to win back in the northeast? How are they going to win some of these voters?
Tom, this is it. And the Conservatives are nowhere near conservatism. They've been the original sin of Thatcherism has entered their soul. They're market fanatics. They couldn't deliver a new deal under Boris. Remember the new economic model?
Yeah.
And all of that. They are in desperate trouble with no way out, and that's a huge story.
There is one figure
Roger
up there.
Scruton,
Okay.
where are you now?
Well,
Yeah.
the late Roger Scruton, I know he was a close friend of yours. Tom, give us the we're going to conclude this section of the live stream in a moment. So I want you to, if possible, give us a concluding thought. We can get lost in the details, and we have done at times, and also we can get excited or interested about what's going to happen tomorrow and for the years to come. But reflect on what has just happened. How would you frame it for people?
I think it's an extraordinary and unprecedented rejection of the governing party. I don't think we haven't had a rejection of this magnitude from a position of such strength to a position of such weakness in one go. We haven't had this before, and they're in a worse position than they were in 97 and 2001 because of reform and because they have no idea how to then rebuild as an alternative. So this is an extraordinary moment.
It is.
And it's primarily a rejection of a total failure. I mean, I think that is, I think it's fair to say it's the worst government in post-war British history. Objectively, it is people are poorer, they're taxed more, and they get worse public services, and the country is more in debt. So this is a terrible, terrible record. There are reasons for that, which are understandable. A lot of governments would have failed it. But that is principally, this is a rejection of the worst government that we've had. And so it hands over to the Labour Party now. One other thought on this. There are a lot of Conservative ministers, MPs, officials who are leaving who have concluded that the British state is broken. They're all kind of Dominic Cummings figures now. They concluded that it cannot work, and the Labour Party won't be able to make it work either.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, I think there is one party that stands well placed to sweep up there, and it's Reform.
So what you're saying is there may be celebration in Labour HQ tonight.
Muted.
But it's not going to be easy, and they could well find themselves very, very unpopular very soon, and finding another rebellion just round the corner.
Well, this will be, to Morris will probably agree, I suspect, but it's the irony here is that Keir Starmer is the man who tried to stop Brexit and get a second referendum. It is now up to him to rebuild the British state and make Brexit work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, that's right.
Final thoughts?
It's been obvious for weeks who the government's going to be, but what the shape of the opposition is going to be, I think, is the interesting thing that's going to emerge in the next few months.
Yeah, and we don't yet really even know.
No.
Friends, thank you for bearing with us through our various technical issues, but we've had some amazing people. Thank you to our amazing panel just now. We've had all sorts of people coming in and out that we have dragged from the party next door. I'm going to go and join the party next door.
Is there any food?
There is food. We are going to actually have some alcoholic beverages now, and not, I would say, with a special mood of celebration, because from everything we've been talking about, there's a lot to really be quite sober and concerned about.
I
in
just
the
want to put a
coming
qualifier.
weeks.
I'm happy.
But we have one happy Lord, and we'll take that.
A Lord of leaping.
Thank you, everybody, and we will be doing another live stream and another video in the morning when we know a little bit more. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us. This was UnHerd.